Turn left.
Bulb not included.
Here's what you can make in an easy bake mini.
Do you ever think about those funny things from the 80s? So specific and strange, only the broke kids really knew them? For families just trying to get by, these moments weren't quirky. They were everyday life, built from stretch meals, hand-me-downs, and pure invention. But looking back now, why does it all feel kind of priceless? Before smart TVs, before remotes with 50 buttons, before remotes at all, there was you. If you were a kid in the 1980s without money for gadgets, your job was simple. Stand by the television and be ready to switch the channel the moment someone yelled. Your parents sat comfortably on the couch, and you stood next to a giant floor model TV, rotating the stiff dial like you were cracking a safe. Go to channel 3. Click, click. No, channel 5. Click, click, click. Wait, back to 2. You were not watching TV. You were running it. Sometimes you stood there for 10 minutes holding the antenna just right so the static would go away. If you sat down too soon, they would yell your name like you had broken the law. This was cardio disguised as family bonding. You memorized where the good channels were, when to stop right before the news, and how not to block the screen. Bonus points if the knob was already busted and you had to use pliers. Back then, being remote controlled meant you were doing the controlling, and if you complained, the answer was always the same. When you pay the electric bill, then you can sit down. Snow boots? Luxury. If you grew up without much in the 1980s, you knew what winter prep really meant. Plastic bread bags stuffed inside your sneakers. Wonder Bread, Sunbeam, store brand, it did not matter, as long as it slid over your socks like poor kid armor. You slipped your foot in and hoped it stayed dry on the walk to school. Every kid sounded like they were walking through potato chip bags. If your bag tore halfway through the walk, you were stuck squishing all day. And heaven help you if it was the cinnamon raisin bag. It smelled weird. Sometimes the bread logo still peeked out of the top of your shoe like a fashion statement no one asked for. Teachers never said anything, because they knew. Half the class probably had sandwich packaging in their boots. If you were extra fancy, your mom double-bagged them like you were prepping for a flood. It did not keep your feet warm, but it made you feel clever. Today, people spend big on waterproof socks. Back then, you used what you had in the kitchen drawer. And when spring came, you hung up the bread bags like snow gear. You did not have a Barbie, you had Fashion Doll. Her box said just like Barbie, but that was a generous description. Her head was wobbly, her hair was glued on in chunks, and her knees did not bend. But she was yours. Her arm might snap off while you were brushing her hair, but you popped it back in like it was normal. Her shoes were 2 left feet, and her dress was made of tissue paper. But she was in every adventure you imagined. You made her a house out of a shoebox. Her car was the laundry basket. She lived in the same dream world as Barbie, just with fewer joints and more glitter fallout. You knew not to brush her hair too hard or it would all come out in one go. Still, you loved her like she was real. If you were lucky, she came with 1 outfit and 1 plastic purse that did not open. But she was your fashion doll, even if her head fell off every few days. In the world of make-believe, she was fabulous. Just do not drop her. She might not survive the fall. You never bought Tupperware, you reused. And the king of all containers? Cool whip tubs. That white plastic bowl with the blue lid held leftovers, soup, rice, buttons, or maybe just mystery food from 3 weeks ago. You opened the fridge and saw a dozen Cool Whip labels, but only one actually had whipped topping inside. Every time someone brought food to a party, there was a 50% chance it came in a Cool Whip tub. You labeled the lids with a marker that immediately rubbed off, and you could never find the right lid when you needed it. Some families got fancy and used Country Crock margarine tubs. Either way, they were stackable, practically indestructible, and had 0 microwave safety. You knew not to put it in the microwave unless you wanted melted plastic stew. But it worked. And if you lost one, who cared? It was disposable, but not really. Moms had drawers full of them like prized heirlooms. and you never threw one out unless you wanted a lecture. Back then, reusing containers was not trendy. It was survival. KoolAid was supposed to be sweet, but if you were poor in the 1980s, it tasted like liquid heartbreak. You used the whole packet, sure, but only half the sugar, maybe less depending on how payday went. The color looked right, but the flavor? Sour sadness with a hint of grape. You would stare at the jug like it betrayed you. Your mom would stir it with a wooden spoon and say, "It's fine, just drink it cold." Friends with name-brand juice boxes looked at you like you were drinking cleaning fluid. You tried to fix it by adding more sugar, but that made a gritty layer at the bottom. And when it separated in the fridge, you had two choices: syrup at the top or colored water below. You would stir it and taste it and then stir it again, hoping somehow the second sip would be sweeter. It never was, but you drank it anyway, because it was cold and purple and yours. You served it in mismatched cups and filled them to the brim. Sometimes there was so little sugar that it made your lips pucker. It was like drinking regret with ice. But no one complained. You made it last, because KoolAid was the cheapest juice around, and if you were really broke, you saved the last half for later like it was vintage wine. Today, people complain if their drinks are not organic or have too much corn syrup. Back then, if it was cold and colorful, it was good enough. You did not need a toy chest when you had a couch. Just rip the cushions off, throw a blanket over the top, and boom, you were in a castle, spaceship, or post-apocalyptic bunker. Couch forts were indoor magic, created out of boredom and budget. Some forts even had rooms, one for snacks, one for sleeping, and one that was always just someone hiding with a flashlight. The more pillows you stole from around the house, the stronger the walls. Someone always crawled in and kicked the roof down, and someone always cried, but it got rebuilt, stronger every time. You decorated with couch throws and whatever stuffed animals were lying around. If you had a working flashlight and a peanut butter sandwich, it might as well have been a mansion. The cushions smelled like feet and popcorn. You used old towels for a roof and held them down with soup cans. And heaven help you if your dad came home and wanted to sit down. Your fort had no rules. The floor was lava. The doorway was a blanket flap. You brought snacks inside and called it a kitchen. You hid there during arguments. You camped there during cartoons. That little cave of fabric and stuffing was your escape. You had no Legos, no Nintendo, no dollhouse. But you had imagination. And a lumpy couch from the 1970s. And honestly, what else did you need? When you asked for ice cream, what you got came in a cardboard brick and had the personality of frozen glue. It said vanilla on the label, but that was more of a suggestion than a flavor. It was stiff, icy, and tasted like a memory of milk. You did not scoop it, you sawed into it with a butter knife and prayed it would soften before dinner ended. There were no chunks, no swirls, just an oddly translucent white that never quite melted. You could tap your spoon on it like a drumstick. One side always had freezer burn that made your tongue numb, but you still fought for the last piece. Sometimes the only topping was a drizzle of leftover chocolate syrup that barely squirted out of the bottle. You needed a chainsaw just to scoop it. By the time it softened, you no longer wanted it, but you ate it anyway. Because it was cold, and it was sweet enough. This was not name brand. It was frozen dessert, and it melted into a strange foam if left out too long. It had no creamy swirl, no chocolate ribbon, no cookie bits, just vague vanilla and freezer burn. And sometimes it came with a plastic knife to serve it. You could cut perfect squares, but not because it was fancy, because it was frozen solid. Still, on a hot summer day, it was the best you had. And when your neighbor brought home actual ice cream, you stared, but you smiled, because your brick was waiting in the freezer, and it was all yours. Nothing said fancy night like a foil tray full of mystery food. TV dinners were the ultimate poor kid luxury. You got a tray, compartments, and maybe even a tiny brownie in the corner. But heating them was a gamble. The mashed potatoes boiled over while the meatloaf stayed frozen in the center. You had to guess which corner to poke holes in or risk a microwave explosion. And once the edges of the tray started to curl, you knew it was done enough. No matter how uneven it cooked, you still ate every single bite, even the rubbery peas. That little brownie? Always undercooked, but somehow the best part. You followed the instructions, but still ended up with molten potatoes and frozen meat. You stabbed the plastic with a fork like it owed you money. And every corner of that tray had a different temperature zone. Sometimes the peas were ice cubes. Sometimes the meat turned into charcoal, but you ate it anyway, blowing on one bite and chipping your tooth on the next. There was always gravy. Always. It covered everything like a bad decision you could not take back. But the novelty? Unmatched. Sitting in front of the television with your own tray, pretending to be in a commercial, it was priceless. Even if it burned your tongue and your trust. You opened a garbage bag full of clothes that smelled like attic and disappointment, and that was back-to-school shopping. The sizes were wrong, the styles were weird, and the colors? Questionable. But your mom said, "They are perfectly good." You learned how to hem pants with safety pins. You figured out how to stretch a too small t-shirt just enough to breathe in it. And those vintage pieces? They were not cool yet. They were just old. But you wore them like armor because saying thank you was part of the deal. If someone teased you, you said, "At least I've got clothes," even when it stung. You wore jeans with patches on patches, shirts with names that were not yours, and sweaters that screamed 1974. If the sleeves were too long, you rolled them. If the pants were too short, you wore taller socks. Every kid had that one shirt they hated, but had to wear because it was still in good shape. Yours probably had a cartoon character you had never heard of. You got teased, but you just shrugged. Because clothes were clothes, and you had bigger things to worry about, like making sure your off-brand sneakers did not fall apart by recess. Fashion was optional. Warmth was not. You made it work. You never knew luxury until you begged for Fruit Loops and got fruit swirls in a plastic bag the size of your torso. It came from the bottom shelf at the grocery store and weighed more than your little brother. But it lasted forever because no one really wanted to eat it. The flakes were stale, the marshmallows melted in milk, and it all tasted like corn syrup and crushed dreams. You would pour a bowl, drown it in sugar, and still somehow feel cheated. It looked familiar. It smelled close enough. But that first bite reminded you. You were not in Kellogg's country. You were in Toasty Circles land. And yet it was always in the house, because it was $5 for enough cereal to last 3 months. And when money was tight, close enough was good enough. Forget rabbit ears. You had coat hangers. Reception in the 1980s was not about technology. It was about physics, patience, and standing on one foot while holding a wire hanger at a 17-degree angle near the television. You would twist it, bend it, jam it into the back of the TV, and suddenly, perfect picture. Until you moved. Then it was back to static and blurry game shows. Someone in the family always claimed to be the antenna whisperer. That meant you held the hanger while everyone else watched. If you let go, the screen fuzzed over, and you became the villain of the household. Some hangers were wrapped in foil like space-age art projects. Others had split ends from being fine-tuned with pliers. You tried balancing it on books, soda cans, even your little brother's head, anything to avoid touching it yourself. Every channel had its own sweet spot, and finding it was like unlocking a combination lock you did not know you had. Your only reward? Maybe catching half an episode of Knight Rider before someone walked in front of the screen and ruined everything. Today, people complain if their Wi-Fi dips for 2 seconds. But back then, we fought gravity and metal to watch cartoons. And honestly, that fuzzy, half-clear picture, it still felt like magic. Halloween on a budget meant one thing. Whatever you could make with tape, a paper grocery bag, and a permanent marker. You were not a witch or a vampire. You were cardboard robot, toaster, or a box with eyes. One year, someone said you looked like a popcorn machine. You said, "Nope, I'm a microwave with a personality," and that was enough. Your costume rustled when you walked. It barely survived the walk to school. If it rained, the paper bag melted like bad dreams. Moms got creative. gluing cotton balls to pajamas for a sheep costume, or cutting eye holes into old curtains to make you a ghost with floral print. Sometimes you wore a garbage bag with lightning bolts drawn on it and said you were a storm. No one questioned it because everyone had a costume made of desperation and imagination. You trick-or-treated with a pillowcase, mismatched gloves, and shoes 2 sizes too small, but you still came home with candy. And you were proud. Your costume might have fallen apart before bedtime, but your creativity never did. No costume aisle, no plastic masks with elastic that snapped in 5 minutes. Just a kitchen table, some tape, and a dream. That was the real Halloween magic. Winter nights were not cozy. They were strategic. If your house only had one heater, and it usually did, it lived in the living room and so did you. Forget bedrooms. Every night became a family campout on the carpet. You dragged blankets, pillows, and every couch cushion you could find and stacked them like survival gear. Someone always got the good corner near the heater. Someone always got stuck by the drafty window. You learned to rotate positions like it was assigned seating at a survival school. The heater clicked on and off, rattling like an old engine. And every time it stopped, you held your breath, hoping it would come back. When it kicked in again, pure relief. You toasted your toes until they were half-cooked, then flipped over to warm the other side. Snoring echoed. Siblings squirmed. Someone's elbow was always in your ribs. But nobody complained, because being cold everywhere else was worse. The dog joined the pile. So did the cat. At some point, it felt more like a weird slumber party than suffering. Today, thermostats are on apps. But back then, if you wanted to be warm, you slept where the heat lived. And sometimes, you never wanted to leave that carpet cave. If you could bend your arms, you were not wearing enough. Winter fashion in a broke household meant wearing all your clothes at the same time. No snow boots? Put on 2 pairs of socks and wrap your feet in plastic bags. No thermal coat? Layer every shirt you own until you become a walking laundry basket. By the time you left the house, you looked like a burrito stuffed with denim, polyester, and regret. It took 15 minutes just to get through the front door. Gloves were mismatched, scarves were hand-knitted and itchy, and hats were usually someone else's. You layered underwear, 2 pairs of jeans, a flannel, 2 sweaters, and your good jacket, if you even had one. You did not walk, you waddled. Going to the bathroom was a full production. If you fell down in the snow, good luck getting back up. But you stayed warm, sort of. If the wind got through all those layers, you just cursed and pulled your sleeves down even farther. Fashion did not matter. Movement did not matter. Survival did. And if you forgot one layer, you would not forget again. These days, people wear heated jackets. Back then, we wore every jacket. No toys? No problem. Just give a poor kid some cardboard tubes, a roll of tape, and maybe some crayons, and watch the imagination take off. 1 minute, it was a telescope. The next, it was a lightsaber. With enough glue, it became an action figure, a spaceship, or a castle tower. If you were lucky, you had construction paper. If not, you just peeled labels off cans and used that. Every cardboard tube became a character, a weapon, or a part of something bigger. You made puppets with googly eyes drawn in marker, or you taped 2 together and made binoculars. Fully functional, if your definition of functional was extremely flexible. Friends brought over their store-bought toys. You brought out your homemade tank, made from paper towel rolls and bottle caps. And honestly, yours were cooler. They were yours. Original. One of a kind. You learned early that imagination could build anything, and budget had nothing to do with it. Today, kids have 3D printers. We had cardboard tubes and dreams, and you know what? We made it work. Summer heat was not battled. It was endured. Air conditioning was for rich people, department stores, and maybe the library. At home, you shoved a fan in the window and hoped it would suck in cool air. If the fan was old, it made more noise than wind, but that was still better than nothing. You flipped it around, tried every angle, put bowls of ice in front of it like some kind of home science experiment. Sometimes it worked. Usually, It just blew hot air in your face while rattling like a lawnmower. You rotated it between rooms like a precious relic, and if someone moved it without asking, prepare for war. At night, you prayed for a breeze. You slept with no sheets. You sweat into the pillow. And if you had siblings, everyone argued about who got the good side of the fan. Box fans, oscillating fans, those tiny desk ones, you tried them all. Sometimes you even tried stacking them, one pointing in, one pointing out. Genius in theory. Today, air conditioning is a click away. Back then, you just laid still, listened to that fan hum, and told yourself, it is not that hot. You knew the couch was dying when the stuffing peeked out, but instead of replacing it, your family reached for duct tape. Gray, silver, black, sometimes even the brown kind if you were fancy. The tape did not match, it did not blend, but it held. You patched the corners, the armrests, the mysterious hole in the middle that nobody admitted to making. Eventually, the couch looked like a science fair project covered in strips and stickers. It stuck to your clothes. It peeled off in summer. And if you shifted too fast, it made a ripping sound that gave everyone a heart attack. Still, you kept sitting. Because the couch was fine. It still worked. Mostly. Sometimes you added a blanket over it, like that would distract from the layers of tape underneath. It did not, but it made you feel like you tried. The couch might sag, it might creak, but it was home. And duct tape? That was just another family tradition. Jeans were never new. They were patched, over and over again. The knees always went first, so your mom grabbed a pack of iron-on patches from the fabric store and went to work. At first they kind of matched, then they definitely did not. Brown patch on blue jeans, red patch on black jeans, no one cared. Function over fashion. Sometimes the patch peeled up on one side. Sometimes it fused too hard and made the knee stiff like armor. Either way, you wore them again the next day. You sat in class, pretending you were cool, while secretly tugging the corner of the patch so it would stop poking your leg. After a few rounds of patching, the jeans looked like a quilt, but that just meant they were broken in. Some kids had brand new Levi's. You had a history book written in thread and iron-on glue. And when one pair of jeans finally gave out, you cut them into shorts and patched those too. If you had socks, they were probably long, really long. Tube socks that reached your knees and made you look like you were trying out for a retro Olympics team. You wore them with shorts, with sneakers, with dress shoes if you had to. They were white or close to white, with maybe a couple of colored stripes. One sock always sagged, one always refused to. Matching was optional. Comfort was rare. You rolled them, you folded them, you stuffed them into shoes like a second pair of pants. No one asked if they looked good. That was not the point. The point was, they were clean, they were available, and you did not outgrow them yet. Every once in a while, someone gave you new socks for Christmas, and you cheered, because tube socks were currency, and no one wanted to spend money on the fancy ankle kind. Those socks, they lasted forever. Even when the heel wore out and slid halfway up your calf, you kept wearing them, because socks were socks, and yours had seen things. When you ran out of shampoo, you did not go to the store. You went to the cabinet under the sink. If it said soap somewhere on the bottle, it was fair game. Dish soap? Sure. Hand soap? Why not? Once, someone used body wash and said their hair felt squeaky. That was not a compliment. Sometimes you grabbed the generic all-purpose cleaner and hoped for the best. You poured a blob into your palm, lathered it up, and told yourself, "It smells like lemons. It must be safe." Your hair came out flat, stiff, or sticky, but it was technically clean. Mission accomplished. If you were lucky, there was that leftover hotel shampoo from 2 summers ago, or the bottle that had 2 drops left and had to be turned upside down for a week. No one judged you, because everyone did it. Budget hair care was not a trend. It was a necessity. And when your hair dried, you just brushed it, ignored the weird texture, and went about your day. Because in a house where money was tight, Being clean enough was plenty. If you grew up broke in the 1980s, plastic sandwich bags were not disposable. They were forever. You did not just use one and toss it. Oh no, that sandwich bag got a second life, a third, maybe even a fifth, depending on how careful you were with the peanut butter. Moms would rinse them out in the sink, drape them over the faucet or the dish rack, and let them air dry like little ghost gloves waiting for a haunting. You would see them lined up by the window, flapping slightly in the breeze, all turned inside out with the corners still crusty from yesterday's tuna sandwich. Some were foggy from wear. Others had names written in Sharpie that faded after each wash until they became anonymous warriors of lunchtime survival. If the bag had a tiny hole, a little tape would do the trick. If the zipper no longer zipped, you folded it over and hoped gravity did the rest. It was not about saving the planet. It was about saving a few dollars you simply did not have. You might have had a whole drawer full of used but still good sandwich bags right next to the repurposed margarine containers and Cool Whip tubs. They held sandwiches, crackers, trail mix, loose screws, broken crayons, whatever fit. And the worst thing you could do was throw one away without checking with Mom first. That was basically a federal offense in the house. Today, people buy fancy silicone food pouches and brag about being eco-conscious. Back then, you did the same thing with a little dish soap, some patience, and a prayer that your jelly sandwich would not leak. It was not glamorous, but it worked. And honestly, when you unzipped that crinkly bag in the school cafeteria, you knew you were keeping a tradition alive, one crusty corner at a time. If you knew, you knew. Bolognia was not just lunch meat, it was a culinary event. When money was tight and bacon was just a dream from television commercials, Bolognia stepped in like a budget hero. You threw a slice on a plate, popped it in the microwave, and waited for the magic to happen. Within seconds, the edges curled up like it was auditioning to be a flower, and the smell filled the kitchen like a carnival that only sold grease. No one knew why it curled. No one cared. It was crispy on the edges, chewy in the center, and full of flavor that was, well, something. You slapped it on white bread with mustard, and suddenly it was dinner. Fancy dinner if you added cheese. Sometimes it would bubble in the middle like a meat blister, and that was when you knew it was perfect. You might try to press it flat, but it always fought back. Bolognia had a will of its own. And if it popped and hit the inside of the microwave, you just wiped it off with a napkin and kept going. Kids today do not know the joy of a single slice of bologna doing a gymnastics routine in the microwave. But if you grew up broke, you knew that curling edge meant you were about to eat something hot, salty, and surprisingly satisfying. No one served it at parties. It was not gourmet. But it was a treat. A little piece of processed perfection on a budget that made you feel like dinner had a soundtrack. Nothing said fashion on a budget quite like a pair of pants so bright they could guide aircraft. Yellow, orange, neon green, these were not just colors, they were decisions. Sometimes it was hand-me-downs. Sometimes it was the clearance rack at a discount store that only sold pants in emergency visibility shades. You wore them because they were cheap, and they were yours. Matching shirt optional. Matching confidence required. They were made of stiff polyester or weirdly thin cotton. One wash and the color bled into everything else in the laundry. Your socks? Now yellow. Your gym shirt? Also yellow. You could not blend in wearing these. At school, people saw you coming from the parking lot. Crossing the street? Cars slowed down. Your pants did the job of a traffic cone. Even the teacher squinted when you walked in. But you rocked them. You made it work. Maybe they had an elastic waist. Maybe they were bell-bottoms. Maybe they were cut like jeans but fit like sandpaper. Did not matter. They were pants. And if you grew up poor, that was the main requirement. Today, people pay good money for retro pants that look exactly like the ones you got roasted for. But back then, it was not about trends. It was about putting on something clean, something functional, and walking out the door with your head high, even if your pants could signal ships at sea. Rip the paper. Are you kidding? You gently peeled the tape back like you were performing surgery, because that wrapping paper was not one-time use. It was going in the drawer with the others, flattened, folded, and ready for its next life. The good stuff, the foil kind or the ones with glitter, was practically sacred. Birthdays, Christmas, random gifts from school, anytime you saw wrapping paper, your brain switched into conservation mode. You held it up like a map, smoothed it across the kitchen table, and pressed out the creases. If it had tape marks, that added character. You might even recognize the paper from 3 holidays ago. Same Santa, same snowflakes, same crease down the middle where it was folded around a toaster in 1984. If the paper was too torn, you cut it into smaller pieces and used it for stocking stuffers or gift tags. Some folks even ironed it. Yes, ironed wrapping paper. That is how deep the commitment went. And woe to the child who crumpled it. "Be careful with that," your mom would snap. "We can use that again." Today, people buy whole wrapping stations. Back then, we had a drawer full of wrinkled paper, tangled ribbon, and used bows with 14 pieces of tape on the back. It was not about being frugal. It was about being smart. And when you reused that same paper on your cousin's gift, they never noticed. But you knew. When your shoes wore out, and they always did, you did not throw them out. You fixed them, poor kid style. You found a cereal box, cut out the bottom, traced your foot, and slipped that makeshift insole right in. Voila, you had upgraded to almost wearable. Sometimes you used notebook covers, sometimes the back of a macaroni box. Anything flat and cardboard would do the trick. It was not elegant, but it was effective. You walked around with a little crunch in your step. The cardboard would shift, curl, and absorb water like a sponge, but for a day or two, it gave your shoe a second life. Your socks stayed dry, for a bit. If it rained, you peeled the soggy remains off your heel when you got home and started over. Some kids doubled up, 2 layers for extra comfort. It was like orthopedic fashion, designed by necessity. Nobody talked about it. You did not show off your cereal box soles at recess, but you knew who else had them. You could tell by the walk, the slight drag, the hesitation before puddles. New shoes were a dream. Until then, cardboard kept you going. It was cheap, it was clever, and it was proof that broke kids always find a way. You know what screams luxury? Wall-to-wall shag carpeting? You know what screams why did we do this? Carpet in the bathroom. The 1970s did not care. If there was a floor, it deserved fuzz. Thick, high-pile shag in orange, brown, lime green, even purple. It was not just flooring, it was a lifestyle. You did not walk on it, you sank into it. Entire homes looked like someone tried to upholster the earth. And bathrooms? Somehow, those got the worst of it. Imagine stepping out of a steamy shower onto something that stays damp for days. Mold? Mildew? Minor concerns. At the time, people wanted warmth and comfort from tile to toilet. Carpet went up the walls. It climbed stairs. It matched your drapes and your couch. You vacuumed like it was a full-body workout, because that much fluff did not go down easy. The colors faded. The smells stayed. But at the time, it was pure elegance. Every kid remembers belly flopping onto it during cartoons, or losing small objects in its depths forever. We thought it was cozy. We thought it was chic. We were wrong. But oh, how it felt right at the time. Roller disco was not just a hobby. It was a way of becoming someone else for a night. You laced up your skates like you were putting on a costume, stepped into that pulsating rink, and suddenly you were untouchable. The music was always booming. Donna Summer, Chic, Bee Gees, and the lights spun like wild stars trapped in a mirrored galaxy. The disco ball wasn't just decoration. It was a lighthouse, a guidepost, a disco deity above your head as you twirled in polyester. Whether you were gliding like a pro or holding onto the rail for dear life, you were part of the show. Everyone was, because it wasn't just about the moves, it was about the vibe. The outfits were louder than the music. Metallic pants, crop tops, rainbow suspenders, headbands slick with sweat. You didn't have to be good, you just had to be in. And when the whole rink synced to the beat, It felt like the world was healing itself, one backwards crossover at a time. The funny part? Most of us fell more than we skated. But no one cared. You'd laugh, crawl back up, and keep going. Because the floor was freedom, and for one glorious hour, under those spinning lights, nothing else mattered. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. And if you think delivering milk through a wall sounds wild, wait until you hear about the homes that were designed for smoke. Back in the middle of the 20th century, smoking was not just accepted, it was expected, and American homes were ready for it. That is where built-in ashtray stands came in. These were not just ashtrays placed on coffee tables or countertops. No, these were recessed, often permanent fixtures embedded right into walls, armrests, and even lampstands. You could walk into a living room, and there it was, your own little designated smoke spot, classy as could be. Some were ceramic, some were chrome. A few even had lids to keep the ashes tidy. And they were everywhere, in kitchens, in bathrooms, in bedrooms. The ultimate sign of a home that was with it. Even guests had their own designated ashtrays. People took pride in them. Some were decorative, shaped like seashells or horseshoes. Others were sleek and utilitarian. And it was not just adults using them. Teens had their own, often built into the back of desks or vanities. Today, of course, the idea seems almost alien. We cover smoke detectors in foil just to cook without setting them off. But back then, these ashtrays were part of the home's soul. And when the culture shifted, they vanished fast, ripped out, tiled over, or collecting dust as relics of a time no one wants to remember, but no one can forget. But the next room? Oh, that is where the real memories were made. Think beanbags, shag carpet, and absolute chaos. Limited access to cable television in the 1980s meant your world came through rabbit ears. You had the basics, network channels, maybe a grainy local station or two. But when friends talked about Nickelodeon, MTV, or the Disney Channel, you just smiled and nodded, pretending you knew what they meant. Your TV had an antenna wrapped in aluminum foil. Your Saturday mornings were for cartoons on the few channels that came in clear. You learned to adjust the rabbit ears just right, then sit perfectly still, because moving even an inch might send the screen back into static. You missed out on the cable exclusive shows, the big movie nights, the flashy channels with round-the-clock music videos. You got public access, reruns, and news that ended with the national anthem. At school, you heard about shows you never saw. You laughed along anyway. At home, you made the most of what you had. Limited channels meant fewer choices, but also fewer arguments. You watched whatever was on. You made it work. And you learned something strange. When there was only one option, it often became your favorite. The picture was not perfect, but it was yours. And sometimes, that was enough. Sequins and leather, smudged eyeliner and busted amps, glam punk was the glorious, greasy collision of everything too beautiful and too angry to fit in. It took the sparkle of glam rock and smashed it into the snarling mouth of punk, and what came out was electric. The New York dolls looked like they fell out of a glitter bomb during a street fight. They strutted and screamed, smeared with makeup, wearing heels and ripped fishnets, flipping the bird at every rule in music and fashion. This was not about perfection, it was about presence, about noise, about guts. Glam punk walked like it owned the stage and did not care if it fell off. It was funny, too, how seriously it made fun of itself. There was always a wink behind the mascara, a joke in every riff. But underneath the chaos was something real, something raw, a message wrapped in tinsel and distortion. Be loud, be weird, be ugly and beautiful at the same time. In a world trying to package you into neat little boxes, glam punk kicked the boxes over and danced on top of them in platform boots. Neon everything was not a trend, it was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. That was thanks to ceiling-mounted radio speakers, built-in audio systems that piped mono sound into every room of the house. They were a mid-century dream, a touch of Jetsons-style modernity, long before smart homes were even an idea. The radio unit was usually installed in the kitchen or living room, with a big dial and a few large buttons. You could pick a station, adjust the volume, and suddenly, the whole house was in sync. Of course, these systems had limitations. There was no surround sound, no playlists, just whatever the station was playing that day. But at the time, that was luxury. It was like the house had a voice. Eventually, stereo systems, boomboxes, and personal devices replaced the need. But if you ever stood under one of those tinny speakers and listened to Glenn Miller on a crackly station, you knew you were living in the future. Speaking of visions of the future, what about a bathroom that was all one color? Homemade school lunches in washed-out containers were the unofficial lunchbox of every frugal family. Forget the cartoon thermos or the shiny metal lunch pail. If you were poor in the 1980s, your sandwich came wrapped in wax paper and packed in an empty margarine tub. Maybe the lid said country crock, but inside was leftover spaghetti or peanut butter crackers. You used the same container every day. The label peeled, the edges warped, but it worked. Your drink? Not a juice box. Maybe a reused jelly jar with watered-down KoolAid. You prayed it did not leak. In the lunchroom, you sat next to kids with perfectly packed snacks, cheese sticks, pudding cups, chips with real logos. You ate quietly, or fast, or not at all. But at home, it made sense. Those containers stacked neatly in the cupboard. Your parents washed them each night and packed them again with care. It was not about shame. It was about stretching every cent. And even though you knew it was different, you also knew it was made with effort, maybe even love. Those stained lids and handwritten notes stuffed under the sandwich were signs of sacrifice. And now, all grown up, they feel like something you miss. You were not really there to watch the movie. Let us be honest. Drive-in theaters in the 1970s were more about atmosphere and maybe a little mischief than anything on the screen. You pulled up with your friends, a date, or an entire family packed into the trunk to sneak in for free. You hooked the little metal speaker to your car window, and the audio quality was one notch above a tin can. And the windows? Fogged within minutes. from popcorn steam, teenage breath, or other activities. People brought blankets, snacks, and the occasional dog. Half the cars left halfway through the film. Someone always hit a speaker pole. And even if you stayed for the double feature, you barely remembered what played. It was about being there, under the stars, in your own little cocoon of tin and vinyl, the smell of popcorn in the air, the murmur of dialogue through 100 car windows. It was romance. It was rebellion. It was a deeply American kind of weird. And while most of them have vanished, the memory of sitting in a steamy car, pretending to care about the movie, lives on in everyone who ever snuck into one. It did not care if you understood it, it just made your body move in ways you did not know it could. Avant funk was funk turned inside out. Grooves turned jagged, rhythms fractured on purpose, like someone spliced James Brown with a malfunctioning robot. But it worked. It should not have, but it did. You had Parliament Funkadelic bending time with bass lines. You had the talking heads layering existential dread over a dance beat. And in the middle of it all, you had this creeping realization. This is weird, and I love it. Avant funk was the sound of boundaries breaking. It said, "You thought music had to make sense? Watch this." It was sarcastic, sly, totally unapologetic, and it made you move anyway, even if you were confused, especially if you were confused. The funny thing is how it never quite got labeled properly. It lived in the cracks between genres, too slippery to pin down, too bold to ignore. It made you want to dance and then sit down and question your life. In the best way. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Back in the days when phones had cords and privacy was a privilege, every hallway had a throne, and it was called the gossip bench. This was not just a chair, it was a hybrid masterpiece, a small wooden seat attached to a side table, designed specifically for long, dramatic phone calls. These benches were often placed right by the hallway phone nook, and if you were a teenager in the 1960s or 1970s, this was your favorite spot in the house. You would sit there for hours, twirling the phone cord, whispering about crushes, repeating, "No, you hang up," while your siblings paced in the background waiting for their turn. Some benches had a little drawer for pens and paper. Others had cushions and floral fabric, showing just how serious folks were about comfort during those marathon chats. It was furniture that served one purpose: conversation. But as phones got smaller, and then wireless, and then fit in your pocket, the gossip bench faded away. Today, they are vintage novelties. Back then, they were the nerve center of the household. And while you chatted away about school dances or new neighbors, something else might have been happening overhead. Quietly, from the ceiling, playing your favorite song. Imagine this. It is Sunday morning. You are eating breakfast, and faintly from above your head comes the sweet hum of big band music or the evening news. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did. Kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. Mounted in your luxury sedan or stuffed into a leather shoulder bag, it had one job: to make you look like a corporate god. Never mind that it weighed as much as a dumbbell and barely worked outside a 3-mile radius of your office. You flipped it open, pulled out the antenna like a sword, and shouted over static, "I am in the car!" Half the time, the other person could not hear you. The other half, you could not hear them. But that was not the point. The point was status. This was not about communicating. It was about broadcasting power. You could be a real estate agent, a lawyer, or just a guy who knew how to fake it. Either way, the car phone gave you an aura of importance and neck strain. Calls dropped constantly, the bills were insane, and the thing got so hot it could burn your ear. Still, if you were holding that phone up to your face while parked at a drive-in or cruising down the highway, you looked like you were living in the future. A very loud, very expensive, totally unnecessary future. It sounded like mariachi horns over a guitar solo. It felt like a backyard cookout mixed with a garage concert. Chicano rock was not just music, it was resistance, pride, a celebration. Born from Mexican-American communities and stitched together with rhythm, blues, Latin beats, and American rock, this genre gave voice to generations caught between cultures. It was the soundtrack of identity, of straddling two worlds and singing from both. Bands like El Chicano and Tierra turned that tightrope walk into an anthem, melodies that carried history in every chord, and they played with heart, soul, grit. You could hear the roots in every note and still dance to it with a plate of rice and beans in your hand. The funny part is how invisible it was to the mainstream for so long, how something so vibrant, so loud could be so overlooked. But if you were part of the community, it was everywhere. At parties, on radios, echoing from lowriders cruising the boulevard. Chicano rock did not just blend genres, it blended generations. It told stories no one else was telling. And it proved that music, like identity, could be layered, complicated, and absolutely electrifying. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music, they were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. Roller disco was beautiful chaos. You showed up in a sparkling outfit, maybe a sequin vest, some bell-bottoms, and enough glitter to blind an entire crowd. Then you strapped wheels to your feet and danced in the dark. What could go wrong? Everything. Someone always tripped on a loose lace. Someone else lost control during a backward spin. And before you knew it, bam! You were part of a 4-person pile-up under a disco ball. Strobe lights made it impossible to see. The music was so loud you could not hear anyone screaming, "Look out!" And yet, we did it. Every weekend. Places like Skateland were packed wall-to-wall with teens trying to reenact Saturday Night Fever on wheels. The DJ shouted into a microphone while people crashed into snack bars and walls. Couples tried to hold hands and skate romantically. They almost always fell. It did not matter. You got up, brushed off the glitter, and jumped right back into the groove. Sometimes you left with a bruised knee or a sprained wrist, but in the moment, under the colored lights with that funky bass line playing, you were unstoppable. Just pray your outfit survived the fall, and maybe wear a helmet next time. You remember the pin clackers were dangerous, but that just made them better. 2 acrylic spheres tethered by string, daring you to swing them so perfectly they'd smack together in a perfect rhythm. When you got it right, magic. When you didn't, bruises. Every playground in the 1970s echoed with the unmistakable clack, clack, clack of kids testing their reflexes and pushing their luck. You'd time your swings, adjust your grip, and pray your fingers didn't get caught. There were no rules, no instructions, just noise and adrenaline. They were toys with consequences, which somehow made them cooler. Every mark left behind was worn like a badge of honor. Clackers were banned in some schools, feared by parents, but that only added to their mystique. You weren't just playing, you were proving something. You could handle it. You had skills, or at least, you were brave enough to try. The funny part? We kept buying them, breaking them, and begging for more. Clackers weren't safe, but they were unforgettable. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it. But they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. If any of this made you laugh, wince, or say, "We really lived like that," drop your funniest broke kid memory in the comments, give this video a like, and subscribe so we can keep turning the struggle into stories worth sharing.